I'm going to focus in my input particularly on farm attacks and farm murders, and of course, as is the case with stock theft and many other rural safety issues, it's a broad topic and there's too much to discuss. But some issues that I want to highlight is firstly a broad overview of the crisis, and with a particular focus on why we say these attacks are unique. And in other words, why we say that they have to be prioritized, they have to be responded to as a priority crime. Secondly, I'm going to deal with some challenges that lead to conflict, and obviously there are many, but two challenges that we believe are being downplayed, or not considered with the severity that it deserves, is the issue of negative stereotyping, and then also of hate speech. And then thirdly, we have a list of 10 practical steps, proposals that we believe could be implemented to address the problem. So when we talk about why farm attacks are unique, we always say there are 4 reasons why this crime phenomenon should be regarded as a priority crime or as a serious issue and should be responded to as a priority crime. The first thereof is the unique frequency at which these attacks take place. In the year 2020, according to the cases that we could verify, there were 63 farm murders in South Africa, which is more than 1 per week, and there were 381 farm attacks. Again, these are the cases that we could verify. The actual number, especially with regard to farm attacks, would be much higher than that, because there are many farm attacks that are not reported to the police, but also even more that might be reported to the police, but they aren't necessarily reported in the media and so forth. So we don't know about them. But what is alarming is this 63 farm murders was an increase from 47 in the year 2019, in the year before, despite the fact that in 2020 there was a lockdown, a hard lockdown for 3 months, and there was a dramatic decrease of farm attacks and farm murders during these 3 months, and afterwards they started skyrocketing again. So despite the fact that we had a lockdown, there's a very sharp increase in farm attacks. The second point is about the unique levels of brutality when it comes to farm attacks. The second reason why we say these are unique. Of course, there are other crimes as well that are uniquely violent. Gang-related violence is a good example. When we talk about farm attacks, methods of torture that we have seen more than once, or in some cases frequently, include but are not limited to excessive beating, stabbing, strangulation, drowning, burning with fire, burning with clothing irons or boiling water, dismemberment of victims. One incident was a lady who was tortured with an angle grinder. We also find in some cases that items are shoved down the victims' throats. There was a case of a farmer who had a bottle of jig forced down his throat. There was a farmer who had a sword forced down his throat. And we can continue. What we often find sometimes is shower nozzles being forced down the victims' throats, and then obviously the hot water tap would be turned on, and so forth. In some of the more extreme cases that have been reported, the blood of the victims were used by the attackers to write messages on the walls, including "Kill the Boer" and a reference to a prison gang. The third reason why we say these attacks are unique and deserving of a counter strategy is the unique role that farmers have to play and farm workers have to play in our society. Farmers particularly are employers. They have people working for them. Farmers and farm workers are food producers. So if you kill a farmer or a farm worker, you kill someone who's producing food for the country. And also farms are the lifeblood of rural communities. We find many towns in South Africa, rural areas, which are completely dependent on a successful agricultural community in that area. And if the farms were to die out, the town would also die out, and people living there would find themselves in severe poverty. Also, I think a fact that is understressed is the fact that farm murders actually lead to an increase in inequality, Why is this? Because firstly, it leads to an increase in unemployment and poverty in many cases. But also, if the fewer farmers we have, the higher the scarcity of these farmers. And in other words, the higher the price premium as well. So on the one hand, the remaining farmers who are fewer in number acquire more wealth, while those who are left behind after such a farm attack, particularly the farm workers and their families and the community, find themselves poorer. And then the fourth reason is the most important reason, and it's the least controversial one, and that's the fact that farmers live in unique circumstances. They are far away from their neighbors and they are far away from police stations. If you are attacked on a farm and you scream, your neighbor's not going to hear you. And also coupled with that, many farms have dirt roads. It would take a long time to get to a police station or a hospital. And also we have issues of poor signal and so forth on farms. And this alone, even if we ignore the first three reasons, this alone is sufficient to say we need to have some other way of dealing with this crime phenomenon than simply responding in a similar way than is happening in urban areas. Now, I know we have a rural safety strategy, but I'll get to that now. The second point I want to make, or broad topic, is of course challenges that lead to conflict. As I said, there are two issues that we believe should be highlighted. The first, or can be highlighted, the first is negative stereotyping, which is a major problem. We find that farmers, but more particularly white farmers, are used as a political punching bag in this country. They are blamed for everything that is wrong with the country. And what we also find is that isolated incidents are presented as the norm, while the norm is presented as isolated incidents. What do I mean by that? I mean, it is a reality that there are cases of farmers, for example, committing violence towards their workers or other people on the farm. But these constitute isolated incidents, and I can provide some numbers on that if you want. On the other hand, the trend of farmers and farm workers being attacked by people coming onto the property from outside is a trend. It's not isolated incidents. But we find that, especially in the media discourse, isolated incidents are reported as if they constitute a trend, and trends are reported as if they are isolated incidents. Stories we hear frequently in the media, and obviously which are condemned and should be condemned, are about vigilante incidents, such as, I think the most notorious example is the Coffin case and the Kulini case. And as atrocious as what happened there is, it should be reported and it should be condemned. But in a particular study of 2016 to 18 that was commissioned by AfriForum, we found that there were 11 such incidents, and there were 3 incidents, what's reported in the study as animal incidents. It's the cases we often hear about is where someone is the victim of violence, someone is shot, for example, on the farm, and then the person who fired the bullet says, I mistook that person for an animal. Now, this is atrocious, and it's unacceptable, and it should be 0. But as far as we can determine, there were 3 such incidents. On the other hand, I've just given you the numbers on farm attacks and farm murders just in the last year alone, which do constitute trends. Now, all of these incidents should be condemned, but the issue is the stereotyping. I mention this because there's a brutal farmer stereotype, which we believe creates a climate in which violence towards farmers could happen easier, or it could lead to an increase. Of course, it's hard to determine scientifically if these things if stereotyping and so forth lead to increase in violence, but it would rather lead to an increase in violence than a decrease in violence. Also, the way in which these incidents are reported in the media, what we have found in a study of, I believe, a few thousand incidents, is that the most significant variable, if we talk about an incident of violence on a farm, and there are many variables, but the most significant variable that determines how the media would respond to that incident is the race of the perpetrator. We find that incidents, for example, within the English media, incidents of white on black violence on farms is reported on 16 times as much as incidents of black on white violence. When I say 16 times as much, I mean there's one incident, and then, for example, there would be one report if it's a black on white incident. If it's a white on black incident, there would be 16 news reports, repeated news reports about that one incident. And we believe that a concern about this is it creates a distorted perspective on reality. The incidents of Kulini, Penny Sparrow, and the coffin case, those three well-known incidents or cases, I know they were not all, Penny Sparrow wasn't on a farm, but if it's a racial incident, those three received more press coverage than 2 years, than the total amount of farm attacks and farm murders in 2 years combined. So this creates a distorted perspective on reality, leading to, we believe, increased levels of undeserved negative stereotyping, which creates a climate conducive to increased levels of violence towards farmers. The second point about potential causes is hate speech, particularly hate speech directed at farmers, but more particularly hate speech directed at white farmers. We have songs like Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer, One Bullet, One Settler, Dubula Dibunu, and we can go down the list that are still regularly sung. We see these songs being sung at political rallies. At the court case of the case of Brendan Horner in Seneca last year, which was a court case for someone who was two people who were being trialed for having committed a farm murder or accused of having committed a farm murder. Outside the courtroom, people were singing Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer. And then we have political speeches with people making comments, political leaders making comments about slaughtering white people, slitting the throats of whiteness, and all of that. A study of 5 high-profile incidents of hate speech or incitement has found that on average, in these 5 cases in particular, if you isolate them, there was a 74% increase in farm murders within the month that followed on each of these incidents. So it appears as if hate speech, there seems to be sufficient preliminary evidence that hate speech leads to an increase in farm attacks and murders. And then to conclude, we have 10 practical steps. We have proposed 10 practical steps that we think could be done to address the issue. The first one is to recognize the severity of the crisis and to release statistics on farm attacks and farm murders on a quarterly basis. The second is to continue independent research on the true extent of the crisis, the manifestation of these attacks, and the efficacy of a variety of counter strategies. The third is to involve local communities through government-funded structures to fulfill the role that was once played by the commando system before it was disbanded. The fourth proposal is to acknowledge farm attacks as a priority of the Directorate for Priority Crime Investigation, which is the Hawks. The fourth proposal is a more comprehensive partnership with civil society to strengthen the South African Police Service's response to farm attacks. The sixth proposal is to revise the National Rural Safety Strategy to make particular provision for a focused reaction to farm attacks. The seventh proposal is to establish specialist rural safety units. The eighth proposal is to establish a holistic approach to farm attacks as opposed to the exclusively localized focus in response to individual farm attacks that we currently have as if they constitute isolated events. The ninth proposal is to provide comprehensive victim support during the entire process. We find victims frequently complain that they feel that the victims complain that their rights are being violated during the whole process, or they feel that their dignity is not respected, and so forth. And the 10th proposal is to adopt legislation in terms of which farm attacks are dealt with more comprehensively. This should include the criminalization of hate speech in which violence towards farmers is encouraged or romanticized. Thank you very much, Chairperson.